What if the story of Earth is far older than the story of life we've been told? What if before the rise of reptiles, before the first forests breathed, before even the bones of dinosaurs hardened in the mud, there was another world, forgotten, erased, and buried beneath time itself? Imagine standing on a coastline that no longer exists, where the continents were still strangers to one another, and the air was thick with strange gases. There are no birds, no mammals, no trees. Yet something might have moved there, something that thought, that built, that dreamed. A civilization not of men or gods, but of an intelligence born from a planet still shaping itself. Today, all traces of it would be gone, swallowed by tectonic plates, melted into magma, recycled into new mountains. The fossils would have dissolved, the cities turned to sand, the memory itself erased by the long patience of geology. But sometimes, when we look into the deep rock, into those ancient scars of carbon and stone, we feel a faint unease, as if the earth is hiding a secret it once tried to tell. A secret about what came before us. Welcome to Historic Sleep. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now. I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. Every story we tell about the past begins with the same quiet assumption, that we are the first to think, to build, to dream, to shape the world with intention. We look at the span of human history, from the first chipped stone to the lights of modern cities, and we call it progress. But step back far enough, and progress begins to look small against the vast calendar of the planet. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. If its history were compressed into a single year, human civilization would appear in the last heartbeat before midnight on December 31st. Dinosaurs would have ruled from mid-December, and before them, for 11 long months, there stretches an age of silence we barely understand. That silence is not empty. It is filled with oceans that rose and fell, continents that cracked and drifted, and countless forms of life that lived, thrived, and vanished without leaving a trace. The deeper we look into time, the less certain we become of what the planet has hidden. What if, in one of those lost eras, something extraordinary happened? Not alien, not divine, but terrestrial, born of this soil, under these skies? What if intelligence, or something resembling it, bloomed long before the dinosaurs ever walked? To most, that idea sounds like fantasy. It collides with the comforting linear story we've been taught, that life began simply and only grew complex with time. But history, as the rocks tell it, is not linear. It folds, collapses, erases, and starts again. Entire worlds have come and gone without a single fossil to prove they were ever here. We forget that Earth is not a museum. It is a recycler, constantly remaking itself. Volcanoes erase mountains, oceans swallow coastlines, glaciers grind continents into dust. The very crust beneath our feet slides, melts, and reforms over millions of years. If there had been cities 300 million years ago, they would now be unrecognizable, crushed into minerals or buried beneath miles of ocean floor. Geologists call this deep time. It's a scale of history so immense that our minds can barely hold it. 100 million years becomes a page, 1 billion a volume. Against that, all of human civilization, every poem, every monument, every war, is a single line written in fading ink. Yet the rocks whisper older stories. In some layers, we find sudden changes in carbon, as if something once altered the air on a global scale. In others, we find traces of metals and isotopes that don't fit the pattern of natural events. We explain them, as we should, with volcanoes or impacts or methane bursts. But what if there's another possibility we haven't learned to see? Consider this. If an intelligent species once rose and fell on Earth, their ruins would not stand in deserts or jungles. They would be gone, ground down, melted, or swallowed. The evidence would be chemical, not architectural. We'd find it not in artifacts, but in anomalies, a spike of carbon, a layer of strange metals, an imbalance in isotopes. It would look less like a ruin and more like a scar. Perhaps the planet bears such scars already, and we've mistaken them for natural wounds. Even our own presence may not last long enough to serve as proof. If humanity vanished tomorrow, how long before our civilization faded? Within centuries, the buildings would crumble. Within millennia, metal would rust, glass would shatter, and the forests would reclaim the land. In 1,000,000 years, tectonic forces would bury what's left. In 10 million, nothing of us would remain but faint chemical traces. Time, not malice, would erase us completely. So how could we expect to find the ghosts of something that lived hundreds of millions of years ago? Scientists Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank once asked this very question. In 2018, they proposed what they called the Silurian Hypothesis, a thought experiment, not a claim. If an industrial civilization had existed before humans, could we even detect it today? Their conclusion was chilling. The Earth is too efficient at cleaning itself. Over millions of years, it erases everything but the faintest clues. Their work wasn't about proving lost civilizations. It was about humility. It reminded us that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It reminded us how fragile proof becomes under the weight of time. Yet the question lingers, heavy as the ocean and quiet as dust. What if we're not the first? What if another species once reached a moment of awareness, saw the sky, built tools, changed the climate, and then fell into silence so complete that even memory dissolved? What if they, too, wondered whether they were alone? To even consider this possibility, we must loosen our grip on linear thinking. Life on Earth has never been a single, uninterrupted climb toward intelligence. It is a rhythm of creation and collapse. The oceans fill with life, then empty. Forests spread, then burn. Ice covers the world, then melts away. In each cycle, evolution experiments, rewinds, and begins again. Intelligence could be one of those recurring experiments, a pattern that rises, flourishes briefly, and then disappears beneath the tides of extinction. And so we find ourselves staring into the geological abyss, asking questions that sound almost forbidden. Could intelligence have existed before us? Not human, not alien, but earthborn and long forgotten? If so, what form did it take? Did it build cities, or did it live in ways we wouldn't recognize as civilization? Was it technological, or something more organic? An intelligence woven into ecosystems rather than towering above them? These are not questions with answers. They are invitations to imagine the scale of time, to feel the weight of a planet that remembers everything except the things that once mattered most. When we look at the fossil record, we see fragments, a tooth here, a shell there, and we call that knowledge. But beneath those fragments lie billions of years of blank pages, pages that might have held stories we'll never read. The Earth has always been both creator and eraser, an artist working on the same canvas again and again. Each civilization, if there were others, might have been just another layer of paint, now buried beneath the next. We think we're the first to hold the brush, but perhaps we're only the latest to leave our mark, destined to be covered in time. Somewhere, deep in the strata, in rocks older than bones, older than breath, the planet keeps its silence. But silence isn't proof of nothing. It's proof that time wins. And still, in that silence, the question persists, echoing through the ages like a voice trapped in stone. If we are not the first, who was? To understand how a civilization could vanish so completely that not even dust remembers it, we first have to understand how fragile history really is. The past, as we know it, is not a continuous scroll of memory. It's a patchwork stitched together from what happened to survive. Every fossil, every bone, every trace we've found represents a fraction of all that ever lived. Most of Earth's story is gone, erased by erosion, buried by pressure, melted in the slow churn of the planet's crust. The rocks we study are not the record of life. They're the remains of accidents, the lucky survivors of destruction. And in that fragile record, even enormous eras appear only as faint whispers. Think about the oldest known rocks on Earth. The majority of them are younger than 200 million years, even though the planet itself is more than 20 times older than that. Everything before has been recycled by plate tectonics, the process that drags entire continents under one another, melting them into magma and forming new crust. What we walk on today has existed in its current form for only a small fraction of the planet's lifetime. That means entire landscapes, entire civilizations, if they existed, could have been crushed, erased, or turned into new mountains billions of years ago. Earth doesn't preserve its history, it rewrites it. Even when something does survive, survival isn't straightforward. For an organism to fossilize, it must die in the right place, at the right moment, under very specific conditions. It has to be buried quickly before scavengers, bacteria, or oxygen can destroy it. Then, over millions of years, minerals must replace the organic material without crushing it completely. The result, if everything aligns, is a rock that vaguely resembles what once lived. Now imagine that process working on the artifacts of a civilization: wood, metal, fabric, even stone. The odds of any of it surviving long enough to become fossilized are almost zero. Some people imagine that we should find machines, metal, or plastic if there had been a civilization before us. But time and chemistry are merciless. Iron rusts into nothing. Aluminum oxidizes and dissolves. Copper corrodes into blue-green dust. Plastics, though long-lasting by human standards, break down under heat and sunlight in a few thousand years. Even concrete, the symbol of our modern permanence, crumbles in just tens of millennia. 1,000,000 years from now, even our greatest cities would be indistinguishable from the bedrock beneath them. Multiply that by 100 million or more, and the evidence isn't just hidden, it's obliterated. So if a civilization existed before the dinosaurs, its traces would not look like the ruins we imagine. There would be no temples, no pyramids, no tools we could hold. The proof, if it still exists, would be geological. Chemical fingerprints, subtle disruptions in the planet's normal cycles. Carbon spikes, metal concentrations, isotope imbalances, layers of sediment that suggest rapid climate change or unnatural distribution of elements. These are the kinds of signs that modern civilization will leave behind too. Future scientists, if any exist, won't dig up our skyscrapers. They'll find our carbon. They'll see our impact written into the rocks, not our architecture. This realization is what led some researchers to re-examine strange patterns in the geological record. At various points in Earth's deep history, we find sudden, global shifts in temperature, chemistry, and life. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, for example, saw a rapid increase in atmospheric carbon about 56 million years ago. The oceans acidified, the climate warmed, and species vanished. It looked, in many ways, like what we're experiencing now. The leading theories blame massive volcanic activity or methane release. But the truth is, we don't fully know. What if, buried in those chaotic signals, there was more to the story? What if what we're reading as a natural event was, in part, the echo of an earlier civilization's rise and fall? It sounds speculative, and it is. But the point isn't to claim that's what happened. It's to realize how easily it could have. Deep time doesn't discriminate between natural and artificial change. A volcanic eruption and an industrial revolution both leave carbon in the air. Both alter the climate. Both end in extinction. The difference is intent, and intent doesn't fossilize. If we vanished today, what would survive of us? Geologists could still read our presence millions of years later through isotopes and sediments. They would see a thin, strange layer, rich in synthetic compounds, rare metals, microplastics, and altered carbon ratios. They might call it the Anthropocene boundary. To them, it would look like a sudden burst of geological chaos followed by silence, and they would never know that it was caused by beings who once built cities, wrote poetry, and reached for the stars. We would become just another unexplained anomaly in the stone. And so the question that once sounded absurd, could an earlier civilization have existed, starts to feel less impossible. Because what we call impossible is often just what hasn't been preserved. The fossil record is biased toward hard things, bones, shells, teeth, and even those barely survive. Entire ecosystems, entire species, entire eras vanish without leaving a single trace. How many stories have been erased simply because they didn't fossilize well? There's a term scientists use for this: the preservation bias. It means that the record of life we see is not the full story. It's a distorted fragment, tilted toward what happened to endure. We build our entire understanding of prehistory on this uneven foundation, confident in our timelines, when in truth we're working from a handful of surviving pieces. It's like reconstructing a novel from a few torn pages. We can guess the plot, but we can never be sure. That's the true scale of uncertainty we face when we talk about deep time. The farther back we look, the more the Earth resists us. Rocks fold, oceans move, mountains rise and crumble. Everything solid becomes fluid when stretched across hundreds of millions of years. Time itself becomes an ocean, washing away almost all memory of what came before. If something intelligent once lived here, something that looked at the stars and wondered as we do, then time has done its work well. Their world would be gone. Their continents might now lie beneath the Pacific. Their atmosphere absorbed and exhaled 1,000 times over. Their tools, their art, their knowledge, all transformed into minerals, into stone, into the quiet substance of new worlds. Yet sometimes I wonder if a trace of them remains, not in the rocks, but in us. Life reuses its own ingredients. The atoms in our bodies have been part of other forms before, perhaps even part of creatures or civilizations lost to time. If consciousness is a pattern that reemerges again and again, then maybe we are the Earth remembering itself, briefly awake once more before sleep returns. That thought changes everything. It means we aren't explorers of ancient mysteries. We are participants in them. The deep past isn't something behind us, it's beneath us, within us, and perhaps waiting to happen again. The story of intelligence on Earth may not be a straight line, but a spiral. A recurring dream in which the planet awakens, thinks, creates, and then forgets. Maybe we are just another turn of that spiral, another fleeting experiment in awareness before the next great forgetting. And maybe, millions of years from now, when the continents have shifted again and new species inherit the ruins of our world, someone else will wonder the same thing. Were we the first, or merely the last to ask? When scientists talk about deep time, they often speak in numbers. Millions, billions, eons, but numbers can't capture the feeling of it. Imagine holding a handful of sand on the beach and realizing that each grain represents 1,000 years, and that even if you held the entire desert, you still wouldn't reach the beginning. That's what Earth's history is like, so vast that our sense of scale collapses. We look at dinosaurs as ancient, but their entire existence, from rise to extinction, fits comfortably into the last 2 inches of a timeline stretching across a football field. Everything before them, 3 billion years of oceans, microbes, continents, and forgotten skies, has already come and gone. To even begin asking whether something intelligent could have lived before the dinosaurs, we must first step into those lost eons, where the planet was both alien and familiar. The air was thicker, the sun dimmer, the oceans green with life. Continents as we know them didn't exist. Instead, there were supercontinents, Valerbara, Columbia, Rodinia, Pangaea, each born and broken by the slow breath of plate tectonics. Mountains rose and eroded, seas expanded and vanished, climates shifted from ice to fire and back again. In those transformations, entire ecosystems disappeared without a trace. If life evolved complexity once, why couldn't it have done so more than once? The common story says intelligence came late after billions of years of slow biological trial and error. But evolution isn't a ladder. It's a storm. It doesn't climb, it experiments, branching in every direction. For 3 billion years, single-celled life ruled the planet, yet even within that microbial empire, cooperation and communication existed. Some bacteria form vast colonies that act almost like multicellular organisms, passing signals and sharing energy. Others exchange genetic material, adapting collectively rather than individually. The difference between intelligence and instinct begins to blur when you realize that the planet itself once breathed in patterns, chemical, biological, rhythmic. Maybe the seeds of awareness were already there, waiting for a shape to grow into. The first great leap we know of came during the Cambrian explosion, around 540 million years ago, when complex life suddenly filled the seas. Eyes appeared, limbs appeared, predators hunted prey. But even before that, in the mysterious Ediacaran period, there were creatures that defy classification. Soft-bodied, symmetrical, fractal in shape. They don't fit neatly into our categories of animal, plant, or fungus. Some looked like leaves pressed into stone, others like discs or rippling mats. No one knows how they lived or what they saw. only that they existed for millions of years and then vanished almost completely. Some scientists think the Ediacaran organisms were failed experiments in complexity, evolutionary dead ends. But what if they were something else? What if the emergence of complex life was not a single event, but part of a recurring cycle? Creation, expansion, collapse, renewal. What if one of those cycles reached further than we imagine, developing not just bodies but minds? Intelligence, after all, isn't a human invention. It's an evolutionary strategy. It arises wherever problem-solving confers survival. If that's true, then the odds that it has only happened once in 4.5 billion years begin to look strangely small. And yet, if such beings existed, why is there no sign of them? The answer, again, lies in the nature of the planet itself. Earth doesn't remember kindly. It reshapes everything it touches. Over hundreds of millions of years, entire mountain ranges grind into sand. Ocean floors are swallowed by the mantle. Continents are torn apart and fused anew. Fossils, which we treat as permanent, are mere snapshots, a pause in an unending flow. Even the bones of dinosaurs, which feel eternal, represent an improbable victory against destruction. Now imagine evidence older than that, 200, 300 million years before the first dinosaur walked the earth. What could possibly survive? The rock record from those times is incomplete, fragmented, or buried miles beneath the surface. We have to reconstruct worlds from chemistry alone, from traces of carbon, iron, and sulfur frozen in minerals. When geologists study these ancient rocks, they find signatures of life, but not the kind that builds monuments. Microbial mats, stromatolites, the faint breath of photosynthesis recorded in oxygen isotopes. But between those layers are gaps, eras where the record thins, where catastrophic change erased what came before. Those gaps are where mystery lives. During the Proterozoic eon, between 2.5 billion and 540 million years ago, something dramatic happened. The Great Oxidation Event. Before that, Earth's atmosphere had almost no oxygen. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, oxygen began to flood the air and oceans, produced by photosynthetic bacteria. It transformed the planet, killing off countless species that couldn't adapt. We call it a revolution of chemistry, but perhaps it was more a transformation that reset the world's living systems entirely. Some scientists suggest that complex life might have tried to emerge earlier, only to be wiped out by this change. Could that have been the planet's first silent extinction of intelligence? Not by disaster, but by chemistry. The planet has a habit of doing this, of resetting itself. The Permian extinction, 252 million years ago, wiped out over 90% of all marine life and 70% of land species. The cause remains debated: massive volcanic eruptions, methane releases, or both. It was the closest Earth has ever come to sterilization. And yet, from that devastation, new life began again. If any trace of civilization had existed before that, the Permian extinction would have erased it completely. It's not just that fossils would vanish, the very surface of the Earth would be remade. It's sobering to realize that even now, everything we know, our maps, our cities, our species, rests on a thin layer of temporary stability. The continents beneath us move at the speed of fingernail growth, but over millions of years, that movement is cataclysmic. Our sense of permanence is a trick of perspective. From time's point of view, we are already fossils waiting to happen. And still, the question remains: what if before all this, before reptiles, before fish, before even the forests, there was something else? A civilization that did not build towers but understood chemistry, not machines, but the rhythm of oceans. Perhaps it was not a civilization of hands and eyes, but of patterns and signals, organisms working together like a vast mind spread across continents or seas. Perhaps their tools were biological, their cities living, their technology indistinguishable from nature. If that were true, would we even recognize them? Would we know the difference between a coral reef and a forgotten machine, between a microbial colony and a network of thought? In the end, this isn't about proof. It's about humility. The deeper we look, the more we realize how little we know. We think of Earth as our stage, our inheritance, but maybe we are only the latest actors in a story that has been told many times before. Maybe intelligence is not a singular event, but a rhythm the planet keeps repeating until it finds the right harmony, or until it grows tired of trying. To walk along an ancient shoreline, to touch a rock older than bones, is to touch a fragment of that forgotten time. And in that silence, if you listen long enough, you can almost hear it. The slow heartbeat of the planet, remembering and forgetting, creating and erasing. It has happened before. It will happen again. And we, brief as sparks, are just another experiment in the long, patient mind of the Earth. If there truly had been a civilization before the dinosaurs, it would not have survived time's long cruelty through bones or buildings, but through the planet's memory, written not in stories, but in stone. The rocks beneath our feet are not silent. They whisper of fire and flood, of oxygen and ash, of extinctions and rebirths. Each layer tells of an age that rose, flourished, and then was buried beneath the next. To read those layers is to read the diary of a world that never stops rewriting itself. And somewhere within that endless rewriting, there may lie the faintest trace of something that once thought, once built, once dreamed, then disappeared. When scientists search for evidence of ancient life, they look for patterns in chemistry. Every form of life, no matter how alien, leaves a fingerprint. It changes the balance of carbon isotopes, alters the ratio of oxygen, leaves behind molecules that don't exist without biology. These traces are often microscopic, but they're powerful. We can find evidence of life stretching back over 3.5 billion years, not from fossils or skeletons, but from tiny chemical clues in rock. So if an advanced civilization ever existed, even one hundreds of millions of years before us, the only remaining signs might look like strange chemistry, carbon spikes, metallic traces, unusual sediment patterns. Modern scientists have a term for the signature our own civilization is leaving behind: the Anthropocene layer. It's a geological fingerprint unlike any other. It contains microplastics in the ocean, nitrogen from fertilizers in the soil, isotopes from nuclear testing in the atmosphere. Even if every city on Earth vanished tomorrow, those signals would remain for millions of years, embedded in rock and sediment. They are the marks of industry, the scars of technology. But what if we are not the first species to leave such scars? What if we have already found their equivalents, buried in layers we no longer recognize as artificial? Consider the metallic spheres discovered in South African mines, grooved, balanced, and seemingly perfect, found in rock more than 2 billion years old. Geologists explain them as natural formations, and perhaps they are. But the fact that nature can create such symmetry reminds us how blurred the line can be between the geological and the engineered. Elsewhere, glassified rock layers, formed from melted sand, raise similar questions. Some are known to be volcanic or the result of meteor impacts, but others are wide, flat, and strangely uniform, as if the land itself had once been fused by heat across great distances, natural vitrification, or something else. We may never know, because time erases intent. Geologists speak often of anomalies, data that don't fit neatly into known patterns. Layers of sediment that shift abruptly, metals found where they shouldn't be, sudden chemical jumps. Each anomaly has a possible explanation. A volcano here, an asteroid there. But when seen together, they form a map of uncertainty, a reminder that not all of Earth's changes are fully understood. If an ancient civilization rose and fell, its traces might exist not as objects, but as questions scattered through the geologic record. A carbon spike mistaken for methane. A metal deposit blamed on hydrothermal vents, a layer of fused silicates filed away as volcanic glass. And then there are the mass extinctions, those moments when life nearly ended. 5 great ones are known: the Permian, the Ordovician, the Devonian, the Triassic, and the Cretaceous. Each wiped out most species on Earth. We usually see these as natural catastrophes: asteroids, volcanism, shifting climates. But what if, in one of those great die-offs, something else played a part? A civilization powerful enough to change the planet, but not wise enough to survive its own impact. What if one of those extinction events was not purely natural, but the end of a forgotten age of intelligence? To some, this question borders on heresy. Science resists speculation without evidence. And yet, science also teaches us that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, especially on a planet that erases itself every few 100 million years. The crust we live on is temporary, a thin and restless skin that folds and crumbles, carrying its history into the mantle below. Most of the ocean floor is younger than 200 million years, which means nearly all earlier history, every coastline, every ocean, every trace has been recycled. In that light, the idea that no earlier civilization existed seems less like certainty and more like assumption. Even if we imagine such a civilization, we tend to imagine it like ourselves: cities, machines, metals, towers. But what if it wasn't human-like at all? What if it evolved differently, not around tools, but around biology? Our own technology relies on external construction, but another intelligence might have built inward through symbiosis, chemistry, or collective thought. They might have used living materials, engineered organisms, or even their own bodies to achieve what we call technology. In that case, time would have been merciless. Biology decomposes, organic structures decay completely. Nothing would remain except the chemical echoes of existence. Perhaps that's why, when we look into the oldest rocks, we find traces of life that seem organized but inexplicable, patterns too structured to be random, yet too strange to fit known biology. Fossils that look engineered but are dismissed as natural minerals. Circular impressions, symmetrical formations, thread-like structures in stone older than any animal. Each time, we find a way to explain them as geology, because that's the safer story. But every explanation rests on an assumption that life before a certain time couldn't possibly have been complex. We've drawn a line in the sand of deep time and decided that before it, intelligence was impossible. Yet the Earth has never obeyed our lines. It transforms when it must, not when we expect it to. It has burned and frozen, drowned and erupted. It has erased its own surface again and again. It would be arrogance to believe that intelligence could not have emerged during one of those earlier cycles, only to be swept away like everything else. The real mystery is not whether it happened, but whether it could happen again. And what would remain if it did. Even now, as we build our cities and reach toward the stars, we are writing our own layer into the rock. A thin smear of carbon and metal, plastic and radiation that will one day harden into a geological chapter titled simply Us. Millions of years from now, if anyone reads that chapter, they won't see our names or our stories. They'll see patterns, chemical fingerprints, isotopic scars, faint anomalies, and wonder what kind of creature left them. They might ask the same question we're asking now. Was there someone here before us? If they look closely enough, maybe they'll see the irony that every civilization believes it's the first, that every age calls itself the beginning. But time doesn't begin or end. It only folds and unfolds over and over, swallowing its children and giving birth to new ones. And each time, for a brief moment, something looks up from the surface of this restless planet and wonders who came before. The rocks keep their secrets. The oceans hold their silence. But deep within the Earth's endless recycling, there might still be echoes, patterns of heat, whispers of chemistry, faint clues to something extraordinary that lived and vanished long before memory began. The world has forgotten them, but perhaps the world itself was once their monument. And if we listen carefully enough to its pulse, we might realize that the monument is still standing. We're walking on it. We always have been. If something intelligent once lived on this planet before us, then the greatest question isn't how they lived, it's why they vanished. Extinction is normal on Earth. More than 99% of all species that have ever existed are gone. But intelligence, true self-awareness, is rare, or so we believe. It's hard to imagine that nature would let it bloom only once. If it has happened before, perhaps the reason we can't find them is simple. They reached the same precipice we now stand upon and fell into the same silence that waits for us, too. Every civilization carries the seeds of its own disappearance. We think of intelligence as the antidote to extinction. But what if it's the cause? The smarter a species becomes, the more capable it is of altering its environment. The more it alters, the greater the risk of imbalance. The same mind that invents language invents weaponry. The same curiosity that builds engines burns forests. Perhaps intelligence is not nature's triumph, but its most dangerous experiment, one that ends not with survival, but with self-erasure. If there was an earlier civilization, maybe it followed this path. It might have started small, just as ours did, shaping tools, bending nature, learning to harness energy. Then, over millions of years, it grew powerful enough to shift the planet's chemistry, to leave behind the kind of carbon spike we now see as our own reflection. Then came collapse, slow or sudden, by fire or by drought, by its own making or by a catastrophe it couldn't prevent. The details don't matter, the ending does. When the balance of creation and destruction tips too far, the result is silence. It's tempting to see this as a warning, a ghostly message from the deep past written in the geological record. This is what happens when you reach too high. But perhaps it's more complicated. Maybe their disappearance wasn't a tragedy at all. Maybe it was a choice. Imagine a civilization so advanced that it understood the futility of permanence, that recognized survival as only one form of meaning? What if they learned what we still fear to admit? That the purpose of intelligence isn't to dominate nature, but to harmonize with it, even if that means vanishing into it completely? We imagine that the pinnacle of progress is expansion, visibility, monuments that defy time. But maybe true advancement lies in disappearance, in leaving no scar behind. A civilization that truly understood the rhythm of the planet might have chosen to dissolve back into it, to leave no trace for future beings to stumble upon. Not extinction by disaster, but transcendence by design. To our eyes, that would look identical to annihilation. We'd see nothing. But to them, it might have been peace. It's a haunting thought that intelligence could reach such understanding only once, at the end, just before silence. Perhaps the Earth has seen it more than once. Each time, life rises toward awareness, touches it briefly, and then fades. Each time, the memory lingers only in the rocks, in the quiet chemical shifts, in the faint distortions of isotopes. And each time, the planet resets, patient and unjudging, ready to begin again. And maybe that's the real pattern. Not progress, not decline, but recurrence. Intelligence as a tide that comes and goes, never permanent, never final. We may just be the latest wave in that endless sea. We call ourselves the first, but every generation does. Maybe the last civilization thought so too. Maybe they looked at their cities, their knowledge, their mastery of nature, and believed they were the beginning, when in truth, they were only the continuation of an old and quiet cycle. There's a strange comfort in that thought. It means that consciousness isn't fragile, it's inevitable. It means that even if we fall, awareness will return in some form, someday, somewhere. The planet itself seems to insist on it. Life keeps trying again and again, reshaping itself after every extinction. Perhaps intelligence isn't a singular event, but a property of Earth itself, an impulse buried deep within its chemistry, a desire to know itself through temporary minds. If that's true, then we are part of something far greater than our own history. We're not just an accident of evolution. We're the continuation of an ancient dialogue between life and the world it inhabits. Maybe the Earth has been thinking for billions of years, one civilization at a time, each rising to awareness and then fading, like breaths in a cosmic meditation. But if that's the case, what kind of memory will we leave? Will we be remembered as a brief flare of brilliance, or as a warning carved into the carbon layers? Will the next intelligence look at our traces and mistake them for volcanoes, for floods, for natural noise? Or will they sense something deliberate in the record? Some small whisper that says, "We were here, and we wondered too." The irony is that we may already be creating the proof we will never see. The plastics, the isotopes, the synthetic elements, they will survive longer than we will. Our monuments will vanish, but our chemistry will endure. We are writing ourselves into the planet's future layers, a geological autobiography that will outlast every building and every word. We are already fossils of the future, and perhaps, in some way, that's fitting. If another civilization once lived and fell, then their memory lives on in us, not through direct inheritance, but through continuity. The atoms that once composed them now compose us. The consciousness that once flickered in their minds has reappeared in ours. We are the echo of something that never truly died, only changed shape. When you look at the night sky, every star feels like a question. But maybe the greatest question isn't out there among the stars, It's beneath our feet. The Earth may be the only place in the universe that keeps erasing and reinventing itself. If other worlds host civilizations, they might last longer, etched into static landscapes without tectonics or oceans. But here, everything moves. Everything ends. Everything begins again. Maybe that's what makes Earth unique. Not the life it sustains, but the way it forgets. In that forgetting lies both tragedy and beauty. We may never know the names of those who came before us, if they existed at all. We may never find their ruins or decode their chemistry, but their story, if it was real, is already part of ours. It's written into the same elements, the same cycles, the same fragile persistence of curiosity. It's what drives us to dig, to question, to imagine, to ask, what if we're not the first? And maybe that question itself is their legacy, the thought that survived when everything else was lost. Maybe the moment we began to wonder about them, we brought them back, if only as an idea, a reflection of what intelligence inevitably becomes when it contemplates its own impermanence. So when you walk through a desert, when you touch a stone older than time, when you breathe the air that's been recycled through every era of the Earth's long memory, remember this: you are walking through their world as much as your own. You are living in their afterimage. And someday, others will walk through ours. They will breathe the air we've changed, touch the rocks that hold our fingerprints, and feel the same quiet unease. The sense that something once lived here, something intelligent, something that thought it would last forever. And they will ask the same question we are asking now, the one that will echo through deep time for as long as the Earth endures. Were we the first? Or just the latest dream of a planet that keeps trying to wake itself up?